The archive chamber was cold and dark. Only a single light hung above a metal table, casting shadows across the walls. The room smelled old, like dust and forgotten memories. Yuna stepped inside carefully, her boots making soft sounds on the stone floor. Behind her, Do-Wan carried recording equipment in a heavy bag. "Are you sure he agreed to this?" Do-Wan whispered. "The Maevari don't like talking about the war." Yuna nodded but said nothing. She had spent 3 years trying to get this interview. 3 years of messages, requests, and refusals. Then, 2 weeks ago, the old veteran had finally said yes. She still did not know why he changed his mind. They found him sitting in the corner of the chamber. Telos was old, even by Maevari standards. His species looked like tall insects, with hard shells covering their bodies and 6 limbs that clicked when they moved. But Telos only had 4 limbs now. 2 were missing, cut off cleanly at the joint. His shell had turned gray with age, and cracks ran across his face like dry riverbeds. He did not stand when they entered. His large black eyes watched them without blinking. "You are the human historian," Telos said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "The one who keeps sending messages?" "Yes." Yuna bowed her head slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this is difficult." "You know nothing." Telos clicked his remaining limbs against the floor. "You were not even born when the war ended. You read about it in books, you watch recordings, but you do not know." Do-Wan shifted nervously, but Yuna remained calm. She had expected this. Many veterans were angry. Many refused to speak at all. She pulled out a chair and sat across from Telos, keeping her movements slow and respectful. "You're right," she said. "I don't know. That's why I'm here. The galaxy is forgetting what happened. In another 50 years, there will be no one left who remembers. I want to preserve the truth." Telos made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The truth. You think you want the truth, but the truth about humans is not comfortable. It is not the story your people tell yourselves." "What story is that?" "That you are heroes, brave soldiers who saved the coalition." Telos leaned forward, and the light caught the scars on his shell. "You were not heroes. You were something else entirely. Something the galaxy had never seen before." Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. But she did not look away. "Then tell me what you saw." For a long moment, Telos was silent. His black eyes stared at her, searching for something. Then, slowly, he reached into a pouch hanging from his belt. He pulled out a small object and placed it on the table between them. It was a photograph, old and worn, the edges soft from years of handling. The image showed a human family, a man, a woman, and a small girl. They were smiling. "Do you know who this is?" Telos asked. Yuna looked at the photograph. Something about the man's face seemed familiar, but she could not place it. "No. Who is he?" "His name was Minho. Sergeant Minho. He was a medic in the 7th Rapid Response Unit." Telos touched the photograph gently with one claw. "He saved my life. Then he died saving it again." Yuna's breath caught in her throat. Minho. That was her family name. Her grandfather had been a medic in the war. Her grandmother had a photograph just like this one, but it had been lost years ago. "When did he die?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The final battle of the border wars, 47 years ago." Telos studied her face. "You have his eyes? I wondered if you were related. That is why I agreed to meet you." Yuna's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table to steady herself. Do-Wan looked at her with concern, but she shook her head slightly. She needed to hear this. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me everything." Telos was quiet for a moment. Then he settled back in his chair, his old body creaking with the movement. Before the war, the galaxy thought humans were weak, he began. Your species was new to the coalition. You had only been traveling between stars for 200 years. Your bodies were soft, without shells or claws or venom. You lived short lives, barely a century. Many species wondered why the coalition even accepted you. But the Vorlan War changed that, Yuna said. The Vorlan War changed everything. Talos's voice grew heavy with memory. When the Vorlan Empire attacked, they expected an easy victory. They had conquered 12 species before. They had never lost a war. And at first, they were winning. Colony after colony fell. The coalition was breaking apart. Then the humans joined the fighting. Yes. Talos clicked his claws together slowly. I was stationed at a forward base when the first human units arrived. I remember watching them step off the transport ships. They looked so small, so fragile. Some of my fellow soldiers laughed. They said the humans would die in the first battle. But they didn't. No, they did not. Talos's eyes grew distant, looking at something far away. I served beside humans for 3 years. I watched them do things that should have been impossible. I watched them survive wounds that would kill any other species. I watched them march through fire and poison and darkness without stopping. I watched them carry their wounded for hundreds of kilometers rather than leave them behind. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. But what haunts me most is not their strength. It is their kindness. They could kill without hesitation, then turn around and risk their lives to save a stranger. They could laugh and tell jokes while bleeding from a dozen wounds. They formed bonds with everyone around them, even species they had never seen before. Even me. Talos looked at Yuna with something like pain in his ancient eyes. Your people are terrifying, young historian, not because of what you can destroy, but because of what you choose to protect. You love too easily, you care too deeply, and you will burn down the universe for the ones you love. He pushed the photograph toward her. Sergeant Minho taught me that, and now I will tell you his story, all of it, the parts that will make you proud and the parts that will make you weep. Yuna picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. Her grandfather's young face smiled up at her from across 47 years. I'm ready, she said, and Talos began to speak. Talos closed his eyes, and the years fell away. He was young again, standing in a cold bunker on a dead moon, surrounded by the sounds of war. The siege began in winter, he said. Though on that moon, it was always winter. The Vorlan had surrounded us completely. 3,000 coalition soldiers trapped in a mining colony with walls of ice and rock. We had food for 2 weeks, ammunition for less. Yuna listened without interrupting. The recording equipment hummed softly in the silence. Commander Borek was in charge. He was a Keth, a reptile species with scales like armor and teeth like knives. He was brave, but not wise. He looked at our situation and saw only one option: a final stand. We would fight until we died, and hope our sacrifice would buy time for reinforcements. Talos opened his eyes. But there were 40 humans in that base, and their captain had a different idea. Captain Jihye, Yuna said, remembering the name from the outline. Yes. She was small, even for a human. Quiet. She never raised her voice, never argued with Commander Borek directly, but when she spoke, everyone listened. Talos made a clicking sound that might have been admiration. She came to the command center the night before the planned final stand. She asked permission to take her unit outside the walls. Outside? Into the Vorlan lines? Yes. Commander Borek laughed at her. He said it was suicide. The Vorlan had thermal sensors, motion detectors, thousands of soldiers. 40 humans walking into that would be slaughtered in minutes. Talos paused, remembering the scene clearly. Captain Jihye did not argue. She simply said, Give us one night. If we do not return by dawn, continue with your plan." Borek agreed, mostly because he did not think it mattered. 40 humans more or less would not change the outcome. "But you followed them," Yuna said. "I followed them." Telos shifted in his chair, his old joints protesting. "I do not know why. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe I wanted to see how humans died. I told myself I would watch from a distance, then return to report what happened." He fell silent for a moment, lost in the memory. The night on that moon was dark. The sun never rose high, and when it set, the darkness was complete. I could barely see my own limbs in front of my face. I had thermal vision, like most Mavari, but the cold was so deep that everything looked the same. "How did you follow them if you couldn't see?" "I almost lost them immediately. But then I noticed something strange. The humans moved through the darkness like they were born in it. No lights, no equipment, nothing. They simply walked forward with perfect confidence." Telos leaned closer, his voice dropping low. "I learned later that human eyes can adjust to almost any level of darkness. Given enough time, they can see by starlight alone, and their bodies can control their own heat, lowering their temperature until thermal sensors cannot detect them. They had trained for this, practiced in frozen wastelands on Earth and other colonies. To them, this darkness was familiar." "They were hunters," Yuna said softly. "Yes. I did not understand it then, but I was watching predators at work, ancient instincts buried in their blood, awakened by war." Telos described what happened next in careful detail. The human unit moved in complete silence, communicating with hand signals that Telos could not see. They passed Vorlon patrols without being detected, slipping through gaps in the enemy lines like water through cracks in stone. "There was a young soldier named Tayson," Telos continued, "barely 20 years old. He stepped on a hidden sensor and a Vorlan guard spotted him. The guard raised his weapon to fire." "What happened?" "Tayson moved faster than I could follow. One moment he was standing still. The next, the guard was on the ground with a knife in his throat. Tayson did not hesitate, did not freeze, did not make a sound. He simply killed and kept moving." Telos shook his head slowly. "That was when I began to understand. Humans are not slow because they are weak. They are slow because they choose to be. When they stop choosing, when they let their instincts take over, they become something else entirely." The human unit reached the Vorlon forward command post 2 hours before dawn. It was a fortified structure, bristling with weapons and sensors, guarded by 200 Vorlan soldiers. Any sane commander would have turned back. Captain Jahye did not turn back. "They attacked from 3 directions at once," Telos said. "No warnings, no demands for surrender. Just sudden, overwhelming violence. I watched from a ridge as the humans tore through the Vorlon defenses. They used knives when guns would make too much noise. They used their bare hands when knives were too slow. And Tayson, he was shot in the leg during the assault. The bone was broken. I saw him fall." Telos's voice grew quiet. "I thought he was finished. Any Mivari would have been. Any Keth, any Vorlan, any species I knew. A broken leg means you cannot fight. You wait for rescue or you die." But he kept fighting. For 6 more hours. Telos stared at Yuna with something like awe in his ancient eyes. He tied his leg to a piece of metal to keep it straight. He used his rifle as a crutch, and he kept fighting, kept killing, kept protecting his fellow soldiers. He did not stop until the battle was over, and the sun began to rise. The Vorlan Forward Command was destroyed. Their communications were cut. Their officers were dead. By the time reinforcements arrived, the human unit was gone, vanished back into the darkness like ghosts. "We held that base for another week," Telos said. "Long enough for coalition reinforcements to arrive. Long enough to survive. Because of 40 humans who walked into the darkness and refused to die." He looked at the photograph on the table. That was the first time I served with humans, the first time I understood what they truly were. "What are they?" Yuna asked. Telos was silent for a long moment. "Do you know what a persistence predator is?" Yuna nodded. "A hunter that chases its prey until the prey collapses from exhaustion. Humans evolved as persistence predators. They cannot run as fast as other animals. They cannot see as far or smell as well, but they can keep moving when everything else has stopped. They can survive heat and cold and hunger and pain that would kill other species, and they never ever give up." Telos looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "That night on Hollow Moon, I watched predators hunt, and I realized the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. We thought humans were prey. We were wrong." He settled back in his chair, suddenly looking very tired. That was only the beginning. The worst was still to come. Telos was quiet for a long time before he continued. Yuna waited patiently, watching the old veteran gather his thoughts. Some memories were harder to speak than others. "After Hollow Moon, I requested transfer to the human unit," Telos finally said. "My commander thought I was insane. The Mavari do not fight alongside other species by choice. We prefer our own kind, but I had seen something in those humans that I needed to understand." "Did they accept you?" Captain Jihi did not hesitate. She said any soldier willing to follow them into darkness was welcome to stay. Telos made a soft clicking sound. I did not know then that her acceptance would nearly cost me my life. 2 months after the siege, the human unit was assigned to a transport mission. They were moving supplies across a barren planet called Dust, named for its endless gray deserts. The mission was supposed to be simple, safe. The Vorlan had no presence in that sector. "We were wrong," Telos said. "The Vorlan had sent a raiding party ahead of their main fleet. They found us halfway across the desert. The attack came without warning. Vorlan ships dropped from the sky and destroyed the convoy in seconds. Telos remembered fire and screaming and the ground shaking beneath his feet. When the smoke cleared, only 23 soldiers remained alive, 18 humans and 5 aliens, including Telos. Their vehicles were destroyed. Their communications were broken. The nearest coalition base was 200 kilometers away, across a desert filled with toxic dust and scorching heat. Commander Borek would have ordered us to wait for rescue, Telos said. But Commander Borek was dead. Captain Jihye looked at the horizon, checked her compass, and said 4 words. "We walk. Stay together." 200 kilometers on foot, Yuna said, through a toxic desert. The humans did not seem concerned. They covered their faces with cloth, checked their water supplies, and started walking, as if 200 kilometers was nothing, as if the desert was just a minor obstacle. Telos had not been so confident. The Mavari were not built for long marches. Their bodies were designed for quick bursts of speed, not endless endurance. By the end of the first day, his legs were trembling. By the second day, he collapsed. I remember lying in the dust, unable to move. My body had simply stopped working. I told the others to leave me. Coalition protocol allowed soldiers to abandon wounded who could not keep up. It was logical, practical. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But they didn't leave you. No. Telos's voice grew thick with emotion he rarely showed. A soldier named Unji picked me up and put me on her back. She was not a large human, smaller than most of her unit, but she carried me like I weighed nothing. Yunji was a sniper, quiet and serious. She rarely spoke more than a few words at a time. But when Telos protested, when he told her she was wasting energy, risking the mission, she looked at him with calm brown eyes and said simply, "We don't leave anyone behind. That's not negotiable." She carried me for 2 days, Telos said. 2 days across burning sand and choking dust. When she grew tired, Sergeant Minho took over. When he grew tired, another human stepped forward. They passed me between them like precious cargo, never letting me touch the ground. Yuna's eyes were wet, but she did not look away. Did you ask them why? Many times. The answer was always the same. Telos looked at the photograph of Minho. They said I was part of the unit now. They said leaving me behind would hurt them more than carrying me ever could. They said that protecting each other was what made them human. On the third day, the group's water began to run low. Telos watched the humans share their supplies, giving extra portions to the wounded and the weak. No one complained. No one argued. They simply gave what they had. A soldier named Hyejin walked beside Telos during those long hours. She was an engineer, clever with machines and always smiling despite the hardship. She told stories to keep everyone's spirits up. Jokes, songs, memories of home. She told me about Earth, Telos said, about vast grasslands and ancient forests, about her ancestors who hunted across those lands, chasing animals for days until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. She called it persistence hunting. I know the term, Yuna said. Humans are one of the only species that evolved to hunt that way. I did not understand it until that march. Telos leaned forward, his eyes intense. Your bodies are not strong like the Keth, not armored like the Mavari, not fast like the Vorlan. But you can keep moving when everything else has stopped. You sweat to cool yourselves. You breathe deeply to feed your muscles. You burn your own fat for energy when food runs out. Your bodies are machines built for one purpose, to never, ever stop. On the fourth day, a Vorlan patrol found their trail. Telos heard the enemy vehicles approaching and felt despair. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, barely able to walk. Fighting was impossible. Sergeant Minho heard the vehicles too. He looked at the horizon, then at his fellow soldiers. Then he smiled. He said something I will never forget. Telos continued. They're tired from driving. We've been walking for 4 days. Let's see who gives up first. The humans did not run. They did not hide. They turned and faced the Vorlan patrol with empty rifles and bleeding feet. And when the Vorlan dismounted their vehicles to finish them off, the humans attacked. It was not a battle, Telos said quietly. It was a hunt. The Vorlan were used to enemies who ran, who hid, who surrendered when cornered. They did not know how to fight creatures who would not stop, who kept coming no matter how many wounds they took, who smiled through broken bones and missing fingers. The patrol was destroyed in 20 minutes. The humans took their vehicles, their water, their supplies, and then they kept walking. We reached the coalition base on the 6th day, Telos said. 18 humans and 5 aliens, all alive. The base commander could not believe it. He said it was impossible. No one could survive a march like that. Telos looked at Yuna with something like wonder in his ancient eyes. Sergeant Minho just shrugged and said, "We're stubborn." Then he asked for food and a place to sleep. As if walking 200 kilometers through hell was just another day. He touched the photograph gently. That is when I understood what humans truly are. Not warriors, not soldiers, survivors. Your species has been surviving impossible situations for 100,000 years. War is just another kind of impossible situation, and you refuse to let it beat you. Yuna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. My grandfather never talked about the war, she said. I never knew any of this. Of course he did not talk about it. Telos's voice was gentle. The ones who truly understand suffering rarely speak of it. They carry it silently, so others do not have to. He settled back in his chair. But there is more to tell. The march was terrible, but it was not the worst thing I witnessed. The worst came later, in a place called the Vault. Telos did not speak for a long moment. His claws tapped against the table in a slow, uneven rhythm. Yuna could see that this memory was different from the others, heavier somehow. 6 months after the long walk, we received intelligence about a Vorlan facility, he finally said. They called it the Vault. It was hidden on a moon at the edge of Coalition space, protected by heavy defenses and secrecy. For years, no one knew what happened there. A research facility? Yuna asked. A torture facility? Telos's voice was flat. The Vorlan were studying Coalition species, learning our weaknesses. They captured soldiers and civilians alike, then experimented on them. Cut them apart to see how they worked. Kept them alive as long as possible to gather more data. Yuna felt sick, but said nothing. When Command received confirmed reports, they planned a rescue mission, but the Vault's defenses were too strong for a normal assault. The only option was a small team, inserted quietly, moving fast before the Vorlan could react. Telos looked at his remaining limbs. They called it a suicide mission. Only volunteers were accepted. And the human unit volunteered. Every single one of them, without hesitation. Telos made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. I volunteered too. After what I had seen, after what they had done for me, I could not let them go alone. The mission team was small, 12 soldiers, 8 humans, and 4 aliens. Lieutenant Sujin was in command. She was young for an officer, barely 30 years old, but her eyes were old. She had lost her family to a Vorlan attack 3 years earlier. Everyone knew she had personal reasons for wanting this mission. There was also a soldier named Dong-Yun, Telos continued. He was their demolitions expert, good at his job, but troubled. He had been captured by the Vorlan early in the war and held for 3 months before escaping. He never spoke about what happened during those months, but we all knew it had broken something inside him. The team reached the vault without being detected. The facility was built into the rock of the moon, a maze of tunnels and chambers carved deep underground. As they moved through the corridors, Telos noticed something strange. The humans were afraid. I had seen them face overwhelming odds without flinching. I had watched them walk through fire and darkness and death. But in those tunnels, their hands shook. Their breathing was fast and shallow. Even Lieutenant Sujin, who never showed weakness, had fear in her eyes. What were they afraid of? Not the Vorlan, not dying. Telos paused, choosing his words carefully. They were afraid of what they would find, afraid of seeing what had been done to the prisoners, afraid that they would be too late. They found the first holding cells 20 minutes into the facility. The prisoners inside were barely alive, their bodies twisted by experiments and neglect. Some were missing limbs. Some had been surgically altered in ways that made no sense. Some simply stared at nothing, their minds gone. Dong-Yun saw them and stopped moving, just stopped, like a machine that had run out of power. His face went blank and his hands fell to his sides. I think the cells reminded him of his own captivity. Lieutenant Sujin noticed immediately. She walked over to Dong-Yun and stood close, speaking quietly so only he could hear. Telos could not make out her words, but he watched Dong-Yun's face change as she spoke. The blankness faded. Something else took its place. What did she say to him? I asked her later. She said she told him, "Feel it later. Right now they need us. Be angry, be sad, be broken, but be those things after we get them out." Dong-Yun nodded once. Then he picked up his equipment and kept moving. His hands still shook, but he did not stop again. The team freed 12 prisoners that night, 12 out of hundreds. It was all they could carry. Lieutenant Sujin had to make impossible choices, selecting who would live and who would be left behind. Telos watched her face as she chose. It was the face of someone cutting out pieces of their own soul. We were extracting when the Vorlan finally responded. Alarms, soldiers, weapons fire from every direction. Our escape route was cut off. Telos's voice grew quiet. We needed time. Someone had to hold them back while the others escaped with the prisoners. Lieutenant Sujin stayed behind. Yes. She ordered everyone else to move. then positioned herself at a junction where 3 corridors met, one soldier against an army. Dongyun tried to stay with her. He argued, shouted, even grabbed her arm. But Sujin just smiled and said something that made Telos understand humans more than any battle ever had. She said, "I'm not sacrificing anything, I'm buying time. There's a difference." Telos looked at Yuna with eyes that had seen too much. "Do you understand what that means?" Yuna shook her head slowly. "A sacrifice is giving up something you value for something else." But Sujin did not see her life as more valuable than the prisoners. She did not see herself as losing anything by staying. To her, protecting others was not a cost. It was a purpose, the only purpose that mattered. Telos was quiet for a moment. "I learned something important that night. Humans do not fear death. Many species do not fear death. But humans fear something else, something deeper. They fear failing the people who depend on them. They fear being unable to protect the ones they love. That fear drives them harder than any survival instinct ever could." The team escaped with the prisoners. Dongyun carried a dying soldier the entire way, whispering to him, promising that it would be okay. The soldier died in his arms just as they reached the extraction ship. His last words were, "Thank you. We thought Lieutenant Sujin was dead. No one could survive alone against that many Vorlan." Telos shook his head slowly. But 3 days later, a rescue team found her. She was still at the junction, surrounded by Vorlan bodies. She had been shot 7 times. Her left arm was broken. She had not eaten or slept in 3 days. She was still alive? Still alive. Still holding her position. Telos's voice cracked slightly. When they found her, she asked only one question. Did they make it out? When they told her yes, she smiled. Then she collapsed and did not wake for 2 weeks. Yuna was crying openly now. She did not try to hide it. "The Vorlan feared your weapons," Telos said softly. "They feared your ships and your strategies and your numbers. But they never understood what truly made humans dangerous. It was not your ability to kill. It was your ability to love. To care so deeply about others that you would walk through hell to protect them." He looked at the photograph of Minho and his family. That is what humans fear. Not death, not pain, but letting down the people who trust them. And that fear makes them unstoppable. Telos settled back, suddenly looking very tired. "There is one more story to tell. The hardest one. The one where Sergeant Minho kept his promise." The archive chamber felt smaller now. The single light above the table cast long shadows that seemed to press against the walls. Yuna sat motionless, the photograph of her grandfather clutched in her hands. Dowan had stopped taking notes long ago. He simply listened, his earlier skepticism completely gone. Telos was very still. His old body seemed to sink into the chair, weighed down by memories that had waited 47 years to be spoken. "The final battle came in spring," he said. "Though on that planet spring meant nothing. Just another name for another season of war." The coalition had pushed the Vorlan back to their last major stronghold, a fortress world called Iron Gate. Both sides knew this was the end. Whoever won this battle would win the war. The fighting would be brutal. The casualties would be enormous. Victory was not certain for either side. The human units were placed at the center of the assault. Command knew they would take the worst of the fighting. They also knew that humans did not retreat. They would hold the line no matter what. Telos looked at Yuna with tired eyes. "Your grandfather was still the unit's medic. After 3 years of war, he had saved more lives than any other soldier in the company. He had pulled wounded soldiers from burning vehicles. He had performed surgery in the middle of firefights. He had held dying soldiers and lied to them, telling them they would be fine when everyone knew they would not." "He never talked about any of it," Yuna whispered. "Of course he did not." How do you explain such things to someone who was not there? How do you describe the weight of holding a young soldier's hand as they die, then standing up and walking to the next wounded and the next and the next? The battle for Iron Gate lasted 3 days. Telos described it in simple terms, but even simple terms could not hide the horror. Thousands of soldiers fighting and dying in streets and buildings and tunnels, fire falling from the sky. The ground shaking with explosions, the air thick with smoke and screams. On the second day, a Vorland strike hit our position. The explosion killed 4 soldiers instantly and buried 3 more under rubble. I was one of the buried ones. Telos touched the stumps where his missing limbs had been. The rubble crushed my legs. I could not move, could barely breathe. I heard the battle continuing above me and knew that no one would come. There was no time for rescues. The living needed help more than the trapped. But someone came. Sergeant Minho came. Telos's voice broke slightly. He heard me calling and left his position to find me. He spent 2 hours digging through rubble with his bare hands, ignoring the fighting around him, ignoring the orders to fall back. He would not leave until I was free. When Minho finally pulled Telos from the rubble, they were surrounded. Vorland soldiers had overrun the position while Minho was digging. There was no way out, no backup coming, just 2 soldiers, one of them crippled against a dozen enemies. Minho looked at me, looked at the Vorland, and made a decision. He picked me up, put me on his back, and ran. Through the Vorland lines? Through everything. He ran through gunfire and explosions and collapsing buildings. He ran until his legs gave out, then he crawled. He carried me for nearly a kilometer before we reached friendly lines. Telos was crying now. Clear fluid leaked from his dark eyes and dripped down his gray shell. The Vorland shot him twice during that run, once in the shoulder, once in the back. He did not stop. He did not even slow down. He just kept moving, kept carrying me, kept promising that we would make it. Did you make it? I made it. Telos wiped his eyes with a trembling claw. Sergeant Minho collapsed the moment we reached safety. The medics tried to save him, but the wounds were too severe. He had lost too much blood. Yuna was sobbing quietly, the photograph pressed against her chest. I was with him when he died. I held his hand the way he had held so many others, and in his last moments he gave me that photograph and asked me to do something. What did he ask? He said, "Tell my daughter I kept my promise. I came home. Just not the way I planned." The words hung in the air like ghosts. Yuna could not speak, could not move, could only cry for a grandfather she had never truly known. I tried to find his family after the war, Telos continued softly. But the records were incomplete. Names changed, people moved. I searched for 47 years, and then you sent me a message, a young historian with his eyes and his name, and I knew the universe had finally given me a chance to keep my promise. He pushed himself forward in his chair and reached across the table. Gently, carefully, he placed his claw over Yuna's hands where they held the photograph. He kept his promise. He protected me, protected his unit, protected everyone he could. He came home in the only way he knew how, in the memories of those who loved him. Yuna looked up, tears streaming down her face. Why did you wait so long to tell someone? Because I was afraid. Telos's voice was barely a whisper, afraid that words could not capture what I witnessed, afraid that future generations would not understand, afraid that the galaxy would forget what humans truly are. He sat back, looking suddenly at peace. But now I have told you, and you will tell others. And Sergeant Minho will live on, not in monuments or medals, but in the most human way possible, in stories passed from one heart to another. Yuna stood slowly. She walked around the table and, without hesitation, embraced the old alien veteran. Telos stiffened in surprise, then relaxed into the embrace. his remaining limbs wrapped around her awkwardly, unused to such contact. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for remembering him." They stayed that way for a long moment. When they finally separated, Telos looked at the recording equipment that Do-Wan had set up. "Is it still recording?" "Yes," Do-Wan said quietly. "Every word." Telos nodded. He turned to face the recorder directly, speaking to the camera as if addressing the future itself. "I have one last thing to say. To whoever watches this, however many years from now." He straightened in his chair, old bones protesting but holding firm. "The galaxy calls humans reckless, short-sighted, fragile. You live barely a century. You break so easily. Your bodies have no armor, no venom, no claws. By every measure, you should be a weak species, destined to fade into nothing." His voice grew stronger. "But I have seen you carry the wounded through fire. I have seen you laugh in the face of death. I have seen you choose hope when every calculation said despair was logical. I have seen you love so fiercely that you would burn down the universe for the ones you love." Telos looked at Yuna one last time. "Do not mistake their softness for weakness. Their kindness is not naivety. It is a choice made every single day to be gentle in a universe that is not. And when gentleness fails, when kindness is not enough, they become something else, something ancient and terrible and beautiful." He touched the photograph one final time. "I fought beside many species in my long life, but I only ever trusted one with my life. I only ever called one my family." Yuna and Do-Wan gathered their equipment and walked toward the door. At the threshold, Yuna turned back. Telos sat alone in the dim light, an old soldier surrounded by old memories. "We have a saying," she said. "We remember, so they are not forgotten." Telos smiled, and for a moment he looked almost young again. "Sergeant Minho," he said softly. "I remember." Yuna nodded once, then walked out into the light, carrying her grandfather's photograph and a story that would never be forgotten. Behind her, Telos watched them go. For the first time in 47 years, he felt at peace. The debt was paid, the promise was kept, and the memory would live on.